What do you think of the nature of revelation in a biblical sense? The idea of God revealing things to people. So this is something that I've kind of been thinking about intermittently, at least tangentially, for a while now. But then yesterday evening and this morning, I was kind of, I think, thinking about it more actively and ironing out my thoughts. I guess that's kind of what I was doing. It feels like the purpose of revelation has to do with communicating a conceptual or spiritual truth without communicating a literalistic interpretation of reality. So I think what it initially sparked this idea in my head and this line of reasoning had to do with a verse I was reading in Revelations. And when I was reading it, I was thinking, this kind of sounds like a weirdly conceptual description of a plane or something, right? You can do that in Revelations. There's a lot of things that they kind of sound like a very weird type of interpretation of like modern day innovations. So the question that would follow that perhaps in people's minds, and I don't know if I thought of this too, but why is Revelations, the book Revelations that is, why is the description so weird? It sounds like it's someone describing their hallucinations. Why is it such a vague, crazy sort of language used in there? And it feels like for a revelation to do what it's supposed to do without like corrupting the natural course of events to some extent or bypassing them, it has to be, by necessity, it is highly conceptual and quite vague. So imagine for a second what would happen if Revelations contained like a literalistic descriptions of modern day innovations. Oh, there's going to be a gun that shoots, it's a device that shoots projectiles out of a metal tube with a combination of saltpeter and whatever, right? You could very easily see how a person would grab a hold of that, and perhaps people could bypass the natural course of history and innovate at an unnatural rate. So, again, by necessity, I think I said this before, but by necessity, in order to preserve the natural course of events, revelation has to be highly conceptual and quite vague. Now, I think you could also apply this concept to something like Genesis, right? And this is kind of where my mind had went afterwards, or I don't know. All right, forget that. It's kind of where my mind had went. So pretend for a second that the modern day interpretation of the origin of the universe is absolutely correct. Now, for the record, I have my problem with scientists. I think at least the dumb ones tend to sometimes act far more certain than they have any right to be, especially given the fact that we've never seen anything like the unfolding of the universe and what would maybe happen in the wake of that and how things or reality itself would behave. Point being, though, for the sake of this, we'll assume that the modern interpretation of the universe is absolutely correct in all of the particulars. Would the writing or the revelation of Genesis have changed at all? Probably not, in my mind anyways. In theory, a literalistic description of the universe as understood by modern science would have entailed things like understanding like what stars actually are, and put people onto the idea of astronomy and things like ecology, biology, evolution, mutations, microbiology, right? So in the same way that Revelations kind of had to be highly conceptual and very vague, it feels like Genesis, to some extent, would have had the same issues, right? It would have, by necessity, in order to avoid the corruption to preserve the natural occurrence of events, it would have had to have been quite vague and highly conceptual. Yeah. For the record, I've spoken about this before. I'm not overly concerned with the literalness or non-literalness of Genesis. I would tend to maybe lean towards symbolic, but I guess my primary concern is whether or not people can use it to disprove Christianity, which I don't think they can, otherwise they would have done it already. Yeah, anyways, thanks for watching. If you like the video, please press the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment if you want to.